Life can unravel in a single moment, quietly, without warning, leaving only questions where trust once lived. For Harold Bennett, a retired financial analyst who had built his life on precision and integrity, that moment began with a simple envelope on an ordinary evening. Inside was not a routine statement, but a revelation, a loan he never took, a signature he never signed, and a betrayal too deep to ignore. Each detail hinted at something far greater than financial loss. It threatened to shatter the foundation of family itself. And as Harold stared at the numbers, a chilling realization began to form. Before we go further, do ensure to subscribe to this channel and also let us know where you are watching from in the comment. Enjoy the story. The evening sun dipped low behind the Portland skyline, casting long shadows across Harold Bennett's small, neatly kept living room. A faint aroma of chamomile tea lingered in the air, a nightly ritual for the 70-year-old retired financial analyst. He had always taken pride in his meticulous nature, every receipt stored, every bill paid on time, every cent accounted for. But tonight, as he sat in his favorite armchair with a stack of statements spread across the oak coffee table, a subtle unease crept into his chest. The numbers looked wrong. At first, he thought it was fatigue. Perhaps his old eyes had misread the column. But no, the figures were clear, crisp, and undeniable. There, in bold print, sat an entry for a $200,000 loan, taken in his name, approved, funded, and now, accruing interest by the day. His hand trembled as he adjusted his glasses and read the details again. The signature, his signature, was etched at the bottom of the document, identical in every curve and stroke. But Harold knew with chilling certainty he had never signed it. The room grew eerily silent. Even the ticking wall clock seemed to pause, as though the house itself sensed the weight of the discovery. Harold sat motionless, staring at the paper, his mind replaying every recent interaction with the people closest to him. Who could have done this? His family was small, his circle of trust smaller still. Yet the answer seemed to loom in the shadows, waiting to step forward and confirm his greatest fear. He rose from his chair, the wooden floor creaking beneath his feet, and paced the room. 40 years in finance had taught him to read patterns, to sense when numbers didn't add up. But this wasn't a simple accounting error. This was betrayal. Personal. Calculated. Cruel. Images of his son, Marcus, flashed through his mind, smiling at family dinners, borrowing small amounts for emergencies, always promising to repay. Lately, Marcus and his wife Vanessa had been flaunting a new lifestyle. Luxury handbags, gleaming jewelry, and trips to destinations Harold had only seen in magazines. Each time Harold asked how they afforded it, Marcus would laugh it off, saying, "We've had a good year, Dad. Don't worry about it." Now Harold wondered if the good year had been built on his name. He lowered himself back into the chair, gripping the statement tightly, knuckles pale under the pressure. Betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. This was more than theft. It was a violation of trust so profound that Harold could feel it splintering something inside him. He thought about calling Marcus immediately, demanding an explanation. But no, Harold's instincts told him to wait, to observe, to think like the analyst he had always been. He needed clarity before confrontation, evidence before emotion. The shadows in the room seemed to lengthen, stretching toward him like dark fingers, as though whispering that this was only the beginning. Harold stared at the document one final time, his heart pounding, and whispered to himself, "This isn't over." The elevator doors opened with a muted chime, spilling Harold Bennett into the pristine hallway of the high-rise condominium. The walls gleamed with marble accents, and the soft hum of distant conversation floated from neighboring units. Every detail screamed of wealth, a wealth Harold knew his son Marcus could never have afforded honestly. Not without help, not without theft. His grip tightened around the bank statement in his hand, the edges crumpled from hours of holding it, staring at it, trying to convince himself it wasn't true. But the truth had a way of cutting through denial. Tonight, Harold was here for answers. He knocked, firm and deliberate. Moments later, the door swung open to reveal Marcus, well-dressed, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Dad, this is unexpected," Marcus said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Harold stepped inside, uninvited. The interior of the condo was even more extravagant than he had imagined. Crystal light fixtures, leather furnishings, a marble countertop lined with champagne flutes. Every item was a silent accusation, whispering of the $200,000 debt tied to Harold's name. Vanessa emerged from the kitchen, draped in a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled. She arched a brow, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Harold, to what do we owe the pleasure?" The words were smooth, but laced with mockery. Harold turned to Marcus, his voice trembling but resolute. "Tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't forge my signature, take out a loan in my name, for all of this." Marcus's face paled. His mouth opened, but no words came out, not at first. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, glancing at Vanessa as though searching for guidance. Vanessa, however, didn't flinch. She leaned casually against the counter, eyes glinting with something between amusement and disdain. "Oh, Harold, don't be so dramatic. It's just a loan. Marcus was going to handle it. You worry too much." The words struck Harold like a slap. He turned back to his son. "Is that true, Marcus? You were going to handle it? Stealing my name, my credit, my future. Was that your plan?" Marcus swallowed hard, finally speaking. "Dad, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Vanessa and I, we just wanted a better life. Things have been tight, and a better life?" Harold's voice rose, cracking under the weight of anger and heartbreak. "You call this a better life? Lying? Stealing from your own father? I raised you to stand on your own, not to bleed me dry." Vanessa rolled her eyes. "You're overreacting. It's not like you can't afford it. You're retired. You barely spend anything. Consider it a family investment." Harold stared at her, stunned by the sheer audacity. His gaze shifted to Marcus, silently pleading for remorse, for shame, anything that would prove his son still had a conscience. But Marcus only lowered his eyes, unable to meet his father's. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Finally, Harold spoke, voice low and final. "I came here for answers. I got them. You've both made your choices. Now, I'll make mine." Without another word, he turned and walked out, the weight of shattered trust pressing down on him like lead. Behind him, Vanessa's smirk lingered, and Marcus said nothing at all. The night pressed heavy against the windows of Harold Bennett's modest Portland home, the dark glass reflecting his own weary face. His study, once a place of quiet comfort, now felt like a confessional, a room where truths refused to be buried and memories rose like ghosts. Stacks of old files, framed certificates, and neat rows of ledgers lined the shelves, testaments to a lifetime of integrity and order. Yet tonight, none of it offered solace. Harold sat hunched over his desk, the dim glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room, illuminating the bank statement that had shattered his world. The betrayal replayed in his mind, Marcus shifting nervously, Vanessa smirking as if Harold's outrage were a quaint overreaction. The words they had spoken echoed like poison. "It's just a loan. You worry too much. Consider it a family investment." A hollow laugh escaped Harold's throat. Investment? No, this was theft. From his own flesh and blood. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment, and memories surged. Marcus at 12, running to him with a scraped knee. Marcus at 18, grinning on graduation day. Marcus at 21, calling home from college late at night, broke and anxious, asking for another small loan. Each time, Harold had been there, steady as stone. Not once had he turned his son away. And now, this. Grief gripped him first, sharp and bitter. The kind of grief that came not from loss of money, but from loss of something far greater, trust. Then came anger, hot and coiled, burning through his chest like a slow fire. For a fleeting moment, Harold imagined storming back to that condo, tearing into Marcus and Vanessa, demanding repayment, demanding something. But anger wouldn't solve this. Harold had spent his life solving problems with precision, not rage. 40 years in finance had taught him the value of strategy, how to follow trails of numbers, how to uncover truths hidden in ledgers and signatures, how to dismantle schemes piece by piece. And this betrayal would be no different. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh notepad. Slowly, methodically, he began writing, not of vengeance, but of evidence. Bank records, loan documents, patterns of transactions. Every detail would be logged, every inconsistency mapped. His pen scratched steadily across the page, each stroke a promise to himself. He paused, staring at the neat handwriting, and whispered aloud, "Justice, not revenge." It was a vow, spoken to no one and everyone at once. His late wife, who had believed in Marcus as much as he had. His younger self, who had built a life of honor and diligence. And perhaps, in some distant way, to Marcus too, though Harold doubted his son would see it that way. The study grew quiet again, save for the steady hum of a desk fan and the faint creak of Harold's chair as he leaned forward, gathering documents from a nearby shelf. This was no longer about the money. It was about dignity, about drawing a line between right and wrong, and making sure that line stayed unbroken. Outside, the night deepened, the city lights glowing faintly in the distance. But inside the study, a man's resolve burned brighter than any lamp. Harold Bennett had been betrayed, but he would not be broken. The morning light spilled across Harold Bennett's study, glinting off the polished surface of his desk. What had once been a place for quiet reading and the occasional crossword puzzle now looked like the command center of a forensic accountant. Stacks of paper fanned out in organized chaos, bank statements, loan documents, archived correspondence, each one a potential clue in the puzzle of betrayal. Harold had slept little, if at all. Instead, he spent the night sharpening the one weapon he still trusted, his mind. 40 years of banking experience had trained him to see what others overlooked. A misplaced decimal, a pattern in withdrawals, a signature just slightly wrong. And now, those skills would serve a purpose far more personal than any ledger he had ever balanced. He adjusted his glasses and opened his laptop, scrolling through recent account activity. His eyes darted across columns of numbers with a precision only decades of habit could produce. Line by line, date by date, he tracked movements, small at first, then growing in size and frequency. Withdrawals, transfers, credit card charges from luxury retailers he had never heard of, airline tickets to cities he had never visited. But what truly caught his attention was the consistency. Transactions happened in bursts, same times of day, same merchants, same amounts, almost as if someone were following a ritual. Harold leaned back, lips pressed in a thin line. Amateurs hide crimes with lies. Professionals hide them in patterns. He began building a spreadsheet of his own, one far more meticulous than anything his son Marcus or Vanessa could have imagined. Columns of data filled the screen, color-coded to highlight suspicious activity. Red for high-value transfers. Yellow for merchant accounts linked to luxury purchases. Blue for inconsistencies in signatures and dates. Slowly, a map of deception began to emerge. Hours slipped by unnoticed as Harold worked, his study filling with the soft hum of his laptop and the occasional shuffle of papers. He traced one transaction after another, each leading to new accounts, some under Marcus's name, others masked behind aliases. But then, there was something else. A name he didn't recognize. A different account entirely. And another. And another. Harold's heart thudded as he realized what he was seeing. This wasn't just about him. Marcus and Vanessa had used the same scheme, identity theft, to target others. Elderly clients, neighbors, even distant relatives who wouldn't notice a missing signature until it was too late. He stood abruptly, pacing the room, his mind churning. What began as a personal betrayal was unraveling into a much larger fraud. A network of theft, stitched together by arrogance and greed. For a moment, Harold's anger flared, hot and bitter, threatening to cloud his focus. But he forced himself back to the desk. There would be time for emotions later. For now, there was work to be done, evidence to compile, truth to expose. He began printing documents, marking them with notes in his neat, deliberate handwriting. Each file was placed into a growing binder, his casebook, his weapon. By nightfall, the study looked like the war room of a man preparing for battle. Yet Harold felt no fear, only clarity. This was no longer about one forged signature. It was about uncovering the full extent of a scheme that had gone too far. And Harold Bennett was determined to follow every lead, every trail, until the entire web was brought into the light. The rain had begun to fall softly over Portland, streaking Harold Bennett's study window with silver lines, but he hardly noticed. His focus remained locked on the files before him, the evidence he had meticulously gathered over long nights of searching. Numbers, once the quiet companions of his career, now spoke a different language, one of betrayal, greed, and secrets long buried. But tonight, Harold was no longer alone in the hunt. Across his desk sat Elaine Carter, a sharp-witted attorney known for her precision and tenacity. Beside her, Detective Samuel Ortiz, a financial crimes investigator with a reputation for chasing cases others deemed too complicated. They had come not out of courtesy, but because Harold's findings had impressed them, his spreadsheets detailed, his notes immaculate, his observations razor-sharp. "You've done half our job for us," Ortiz remarked, flipping through a binder of evidence. "These aren't just transactions. This is a trail." Elaine nodded, tapping a page where several deposits funneled through shell accounts. "And here," she added, "is where it gets interesting. These aren't isolated. They connect to at least 3 other victims, elderly, just like you. People Marcus and Vanessa assumed wouldn't notice until it was too late." Harold leaned forward, the weight of her words sinking in. "So it wasn't just me." "No," Elaine said softly. "They've done this before. And worse. They've gotten comfortable doing it." The attorney's voice carried no judgment, only resolve. But to Harold, the confirmation cut deep. He had hoped, despite the evidence, that his betrayal had been a one-time mistake, born of desperation. Now, there was no denying the truth. Marcus and Vanessa had built their world of luxury on a foundation of lies and stolen lives. Over the next hour, the trio dissected Harold's findings. Elaine explained how falsified records could be cross-referenced with official banking logs. Ortiz identified patterns, suspicious signatures, digital fingerprints, even geolocation data from ATM withdrawals Marcus couldn't explain. Harold listened, adding his own insights, pointing out anomalies only a lifetime in finance could reveal. But it was the discovery of hidden bank accounts that shifted the case from promising to airtight. "These accounts aren't just hidden," Ortiz said, sliding a printout across the desk. "They're layered. Funds move between them quickly to obscure their origin. But whoever did this got sloppy. One account still lists Marcus's personal email as a recovery contact." Harold stared at the evidence, his pulse steady but his hands clenched tightly in his lap. Justice was no longer a vague hope. It was tangible, documented, real. Elaine closed the binder with deliberate care. "With this, Harold, we can build a case that not only exposes them but ensures restitution. Civil, criminal, both. They won't just face consequences. They'll face everything." For the first time since this nightmare began, Harold allowed himself a slow breath. It wasn't relief, not yet. But it was something close. He glanced at the rain-smeared window, watching the city lights blur and shimmer. Somewhere out there, Marcus and Vanessa were living as if their scheme was untouchable. But the numbers had told their story, and now, so would the law. Harold looked back to Elaine and Ortiz, his voice calm but resolute. "Let's finish this." The courtroom was silent, heavy with the weight of anticipation. Harold Bennett sat in the second row, his posture straight, but his hands folded tightly in his lap. Years of discipline kept his expression calm, but inside, emotions churned, anger, sorrow, and a quiet resolve. Across the aisle, Marcus and Vanessa sat together at the defense table. Marcus avoided his father's gaze, his eyes fixed on the floor, jaw tight. Vanessa, on the other hand, still carried the faintest trace of her trademark smirk, though it wavered each time a new piece of evidence was presented. Elaine Carter stood before the jury, poised and unflinching. With each word, she laid out the facts, not in sweeping accusations, but in precise, deliberate strokes. Bank records were projected on the screen, dates, amounts, account numbers. Each figure was matched to forged documents, each signature compared to Harold's authentic handwriting. Detective Ortiz took the stand next, explaining how funds had been funneled through hidden accounts, bounced between shell companies, and ultimately spent on luxury goods and international travel. He spoke in calm, measured tones, but the story his evidence told was damning. Marcus shifted uneasily, running a hand through his hair. Vanessa crossed her arms, feigning indifference, but her nails dug into her sleeve. Harold sat motionless, watching it all unfold. Not once did he look away. Not when the falsified loan agreement was displayed, not when receipts from designer boutiques scrolled across the screen, not even when photos of the couple's extravagant vacations appeared as proof of ill-gotten gains. Each image felt like a wound, but also like a stitch closing the tear his son had made in his life. The prosecutor summarized it all with quiet authority. This was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated scheme. Built on deception, sustained by greed, and executed against a man who trusted them implicitly. Vanessa finally looked toward Harold then, her smirk gone, replaced by something sharper, fear. Marcus glanced up too, meeting his father's eyes for the first time in months. There was no plea in his expression now, only shame. Elaine returned to her seat, her job done. The evidence spoke louder than any words could. The judge called for a brief recess before closing statements. As the gavel struck, the sound echoed like a final warning. Harold rose slowly, feeling the stiffness in his knees, but also the strange lightness of knowing the truth had finally been brought to light. No one spoke to him, not Marcus, not Vanessa. They sat in silence as Harold walked past, their confidence crumbling like a house built on sand to the table. Marcus whispered something under his breath, too soft to hear, but Harold suspected it was not an apology. As Harold stepped into the hallway, the murmur of the courtroom faded behind him. The storm had not yet broken, but the sky was heavy, ready to unleash its verdict. And Harold, he would be there to watch it fall. The courtroom was hushed, as though the very walls understood the gravity of what was about to happen. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating the judge's bench in pale gold. Harold Bennett sat quietly in the second row, hands clasped, heart steady. Today was sentencing day, a moment that felt both inevitable and surreal. Marcus sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped, his once proud demeanor gone. Beside him, Vanessa fidgeted, her manicured hands twisting a silk scarf that had likely been bought with stolen money. Gone was her smirk. In its place lingered a pale, tight-lipped dread. The judge's voice rang clear. Marcus Bennett and Vanessa Cole, the court has reviewed the evidence in full. The fraudulent loan of $200,000 was only the beginning. Layered accounts, falsified records, identity theft. Each piece of this scheme was deliberate and damaging, not only to the plaintiff but to multiple victims. The gavel struck once, a sharp reminder of finality. Assets obtained through fraudulent means will be seized. Future wages will be garnished until restitution is fulfilled. Criminal records will be maintained in accordance with the law. These actions are necessary to uphold justice and deter others from similar acts. Marcus closed his eyes, his jaw tightening as if bracing for a blow. Vanessa flinched at the word seized, as though her mind was already racing through the list of possessions soon to be stripped from her life. Jewelry, handbags, vacations, prestige. Harold did not look at them, not out of coldness, but out of quiet resolve. This was no longer his burden to bear. The judge continued, laying out the terms in detail: probation, repayment schedules, forfeiture of property. But Harold's thoughts drifted beyond the courtroom. He thought of the nights he had spent poring over spreadsheets, the endless columns of numbers leading to this very moment. He thought of the anger that once threatened to consume him, and how he had refused to let it. Justice, not vengeance. Truth, not rage. As the proceedings came to an end, Marcus turned slightly, as though to meet his father's eyes. But Harold didn't return the glance. There was nothing left to say, not here, not now. The judge gave a final statement. This case serves as a reminder that greed carries a price, one far greater than any temporary gain. The gavel struck a final time. Outside, the courthouse steps were slick from a light morning rain. Harold paused halfway down, drawing a long breath. Around him, lawyers and spectators murmured, but their voices felt distant. What mattered was not the punishment handed down, nor the possessions soon to be auctioned off. What mattered was that the truth had been seen. That betrayal had not gone unanswered. He glanced once at the courthouse doors, where Marcus and Vanessa would soon emerge, not as victors, but as cautionary figures marked by their own choices. Then Harold turned away, shoulders straight, his steps measured and calm. He did not feel triumphant, only restored. If you enjoyed Harold, Marcus, and Vanessa's intense story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping tales. Drop your thoughts on their choices and rate this story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Where are you watching from? We'd love to know.